Welcome back to Arsenal Pass Time in the Round, episode 21. Today we're joined by Tariq Patel. Tariq is the recently crowned United States national champion. He's also the prime architect of the most recent deck to take Flesh and Blood by storm, Lightning Briar. Anyways, Tariq, thank you so much for joining us. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Can't complain. Happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, must feel on top of the world after that win. Obviously, an incredible achievement. I said this during one of my interviews that because they were asking us to kind of make predictions on who we wanted to win. And I think that for you, it's probably one of the most interesting and kind of incredible stories we've had in Flesh and Blood, right? So we have someone that comes from Magic the Gathering, comes in a short amount of time, is able to learn the game and excel to a level where they're actually the national champion. So not much higher than that at this point. So really a great narrative. And I think it really just showed that hard work paid off because we saw you go through that circuit, right? There's all the work and the practice that goes into playing before a professional event, but you went to Dallas, got that crushing bubble out at 9th, but then doubled down, went into Cincinnati, almost got the gold then, and then rematch in the finals, and you take it home. So incredible. I do want to start off by asking you, we talked about kind of a little bit here. You came from the Magic the Gathering as your background. So what was the transition and what drew you to Flesh and Blood?
Right. So at the beginning of the summer, I think was when LSS first kind of announced their pro scene. I remember the big announcement regarding the callings, the prize money, the potential pro scene in 2022. And it really captivated me because at the time, as you may or may not be aware, I think Wizards of the Coast was kind of moving away from whatever structure they had over the last 3 years. And while EDH and the casual play is fine, it doesn't kind of entice me the same way that a competitive environment really does. And to take it a step further, I'd always enjoyed playing Magic at kind of the highest level. I was kind of around the SCG for years, the Grand Prix, the Pro Tours. But I was never at a place in my life where I could really compete on it for a good solid period at a time. And I always kind of earmarked this part of my life that when I have more time, I can kind of throw myself into gaming a little bit more and kind of get a little bit more competitive. So I kind of saw, here's this new upcoming game that I've heard a lot about from, various different friends who own stores and play card games, and they've said nothing but positive things. And their kind of direction is aligned with where, my future goals are directed as well. So I took the leap and I decided to learn the game.
Awesome. So sorry, Hayden, go ahead.
I was going to say, because Tariq, people may not know, but it's not just like you were a grinder and played a bit of Magic. Like you had reasonable success in Magic the Gathering, right? Like multiple GP top 8s. Can you tell us a little bit about your resume and your, I guess, your previous TCG life?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's weird to talk about because, I don't like to keep track. I've never been the guy that kind of advertises my top 8s on my Twitter profile or anything like that. But, yeah, I've had multiple SCG top 8s. I was on the SCG tour for a while. Doing the whole leaderboard race thing. I have an invitational top 8, Grand Prix top 8. Basically everything except for success on the Pro Tour level because those guys are just at another level. And honestly, the opportunities weren't always there for me. A lot of the times when I tried to compete, it was, in the middle of school or something else going on. And that's why I kind of earmarked this part of my life so that, one day I could try get to that level and, try and stay on that Pro Tour train as it was called back in the day. But Wizards of the Coast, life, everything else took a turn, and things changed. So, so here we are today.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you a question, kind of about. Yeah, I think we said it in a funny way. Be what's your cheat code? But what do you think is your key to success? Right, you picked up the game and in a short amount of time, were able to achieve an incredible amount of success. Like even if you didn't become the national champion. If you were, let's say, we stopped at Dallas, still a serious achievement for someone who had only been playing for as long as you did. How did you approach like learning the game, and then also how did you get good so fast, right? Because it feels like sometimes it's local scene dependent. It's kind of who does someone take you under their wing? What was your way to, I don't know, increase your skill level as fast as you did?
A large part of it has to do with luck, right? Timing and circumstance, I think, in anything you do in life has a huge part to play in anything. So I was just the right guy with the right background, and I was in the right area. You mentioned people that helped me. Rob Seigel, who I know you two are familiar with, lives like 10 minutes down from me. And it really helps having somebody like that who has been around the game since its inception, be near you, kind of befriend you, and is available to kind of walk you through kind of how to learn the game, how to start thinking about the game properly, and it really kind of springboarded me to where I am today. In terms of actual process, it's kind of just doing the same things I've been doing over and over again in various different games across various number of years, and just kind of applying the same kind of methodology to Flesh and Blood. I'm the kind of guy that I hate heuristics to an extent. I do not believe that you should listen to the general consensus on a lot of things, because people take shortcuts. There's a lot of work that goes into understanding something, like truly understanding something, and it's very easy to fool yourself in a lot of ways that certain things work in a certain way. So anytime I start something new, or I have an endeavor I want to understand, I really kind of just break things down to their first principles, their core concepts, and I try and rebuild it back up. And I'd say like 95% of the time, they do end up lining up with the common heuristics or consensus out there, right? There's a reason why common sense is common. But the edge in most of these games, or anything you do in life, is in that like 5% where the stuff you discover is what makes it special, and what makes what you do unique, that other people kind of haven't figured out, or might be doing a little different.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good example would be is like 95% of the time you'll be in line with the heuristics, and 5% of the time you'll create a Lightning Briar deck.
Yeah, you could say something like that.
It's a good place to start, right? And you talked about, you're pretty humble there, Tariq, right? You talked about, in terms of, I guess, just you said right guy, right time. But I think if you look at it, and you just talked about your methodology and how you approach things, I think if you look at the game of Flesh and Blood, the way that you approach TCGs and the way you approach your methodology lines up so well with how Flesh and Blood works, because it's a very, very deep game. And a lot of the time, in-depth understanding is actually the most important thing about this game. You can't just take a high level, if we talk about other games where maybe you can pick up a deck list, right? And you can run with it with a few sort of heuristics, right? Someone can tell you a few things and you can run with it. It's very difficult to do in this game when there's a lot of nuance to turn-based structures, to game-based structures. So, for someone like yourself who really breaks that down and builds it back up, I think Flesh and Blood, as it turns out, is just like kind of the perfect game for you.
Yeah, for sure. I was saying this the other day. This game revolves around tempo, and I think that is the least understood concept in any card game ever. I know, the personalities, Cedric Phillips and Patrick Sullivan, they love joking about like what is tempo, and they go back and forth, and they have a whole bit on the damn thing, but they're right in a sense, right? You'll hear players at shops like throw that term out all the time, like maintain tempo, keep the tempo, you got to shift the tempo, but like nobody really understands what that means, and it bodes well for a newcomer in this game when card advantage is just not a thing to an extent, right? Because there's that hard reset at every turn where you're functionally drawing back up to 4 cards. So and the board set is functionally wiped clean for the most part. So everything that came before, is almost irrelevant. And all that's left at the end of the day is like your life total and then the tempo of your plays. So it has been advantageous to really break stuff down, because the concepts employed in Flesh and Blood are so alien, I'd say, to any other TCG or card game that I've ever played or experienced.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I love the word tempo, because, like you said, everybody's got a different definition. It feels like it.
That's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. So, can you talk to me a little bit about the Lightning Briar deck? I think I understand its origin story, but what was the catalyst that spawned this new archetype per se?
The catalyst was one day I did a draft, and I have a big rule that when I don't know what's going on, just keep it simple, stupid. So, take all the ones, take all the zeros, just keep it simple. Don't think too much. And so I drafted a really low curve deck with a bunch of zeros and ones, and it worked super, super well. And I started breaking down, why did this work so well? Why did somebody with very little experience be able to relatively dominate people who had seemingly a lot more experience and understanding of the game? I wasn't playing particularly well at first too, right? Mistakes are how you learn, so I was definitely missequencing stuff, but I always felt like super far ahead no matter how I messed up. So I like to say, to pass the donkey test, I was the donkey, and no matter how much I messed up, it was doing good. So from there, I kind of went on, and I was like, can I make this a constructed deck? what advantages or disadvantages would I have? The obvious disadvantage is cards that cost 1 or 0 are obviously a little bit weaker than cards that cost 2 or 3. But the massive advantage is that if I have one extra card, because I do not need to pay for a card, because in this game the cards are intrinsically the resources in of themselves. So if you start with 4 cards and you use one to pay for a resource, you're only left with 3 in hand. So by having that concept of everything being free, I was functionally up a card every turn, and that alone, even through poor play or being a little bit weaker in terms of card for card, the way they lined up, was enough of advantage to kind of push it over the edge. And that's kind of where the idea kind of took off. And that's kind of how it started.
Yeah, so you make this constructed deck, right? Did you see success immediately, or were there some kind of rocky beginnings?
Ooh, there were some rocky beginnings. So the first version of the deck had, instead of Grasp of the Arcanite, I was playing Mark of Lightning, the common, because I'm like 1 damage, and I play a lot of Ball Lightnings, 2 damage. Like, this is perfect. And it had like Coax of Commotion, which was like just the worst card in the world. And it had so many of these like little janky 0-for-4s that the deck was not cohesive, but it came together at times. There were times where I would drop the non-attack action, attack, and it would just come in for like 15 damage off of like a base card 4 hand. So I knew there was something there. It was putting the little pieces together and how do I fix the inconsistencies that took like a month. But the original concept was solid, and you can tell that very quickly when you start a new deck, because I'm sure you guys too, when you're playing around with new brews and new kind of ideas, when you have something special, even if it doesn't always work. I call it losing well. You get the crap beat out of you, but you're like, that felt like a good loss. Like, I'm onto something here. And then you keep playing. You know what I mean? I feel like they're good losses and they're bad losses. When you get beat bad, you're like, I'm done with this. I'm never playing this deck again. This deck was like, I was getting beaten a lot when I first started, but I'm like, there's something here. I don't mind losing. I'm gonna keep working at it.
So I think that the narrative of this deck actually gets even more interesting, right? So you create this deck and you start seeing success. So let's say you start finding it a bit. It looks really good, but then somebody top 8s with it, and next thing you know, it's the talk of the town, right? This is the hot deck around. It goes 9-0 in UK Nationals. Now we got a big problem, Tariq. Now we got to figure out how do we get an edge in the mirror. So what's going through your head right then? Like, you effectively broke the format. We look at like UK Nationals and how well it performed there. That could have been you at US Nationals. Obviously, your result ended up being good anyway. But what went through your head, and like, how are you going to tackle that new problem? Because it's a massive problem, right? Like, your deck is now the deck, right? It became like 25% of the meta or something like that, effectively, right? There's probably some Earth Briars in there as well.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm going to quote my friend for a little bit, because after I ended up winning Nationals, he doesn't play Flesh and Blood, but he knew about the deck's origin. He's like a good friend of mine. He plays a lot of Magic with me from time to time. But he asked me if I felt unlucky that my deck got leaked, or that I felt lucky that I won the championship. So I thought that was an elegant way to put it. But yeah, so I thought about that a lot, probably way more than I should have, of how free of a tournament it would have been, had the deck not got leaked and everybody had just been on like Bravo and Prism and had never even seen the deck before. And if I could just take it into such an open field, it would have been such a free roll. But like you said, when I first made the deck, I was so new to the game that I shared it with a couple people, because I'm not egotistical enough to join a new game, make a new deck, and go, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Like, I'm not sharing it with anyone. I'm keeping it close to the chest. And I shared it with a couple people in Europe. So I kind of always knew that it would be in Europe to start with. And to be fair, I wasn't even queued for Nationals at that time. So when I was making this deck, I was only making it for the Orlando Calling. I was not making it for the US Nationals, because I wasn't queued. I missed the RTN season, so I was just kind of doing it for the fun of doing it. And I think that was a big part of it too. I was having fun playing this game. I was playing around with different ideas just for the sake of it. And with a concept like this, especially the concept that hasn't been seen in Flesh and Blood per se anymore, when I showed it to my friend, he was like, this is mind blowing. Like, I never consider that we don't actually have to pay for cards. And, it just takes one person to talk to one person, and then it kind of trees out, with me being at the point, it's like an inverse funnel. And from there, yeah, it got to Chris Higashi. I remember I was in Cincinnati. I think I just finished my top 8 or top 4 match. And I look over and all I hear is like Chris Higashi go like Captain Call Blue and Nibblism. And I'm like, I was like, what in the heck? Like, who plays those cards? So I go over to him and I asked him, I was like, hey, just out of curiosity, like, where'd you get the deck from? And he told me a name, and I'd recognize the name at that point. Because at that point, enough people knew about it. It kind of traveled in the Flesh and Blood X Magic player community that I was getting messages from people I'd either played with on the circuit before, or I'd seen at GPs before, and they kind of hit me up being like, hey, I got this deck from so-and-so Grinder. He said, you kind of came up with it. What is your updated list? What is this? What is that? So I kind of knew it was going around, but I thought it could be self-contained. And to an extent, I actually didn't think it would be that big of a problem if it was just spoiled at UK National. Okay. Because the original thing that happened was when Higashi top 8 Cincinnati, it was on the map, right? I remember watching a YouTube video where somebody kind of goes over it and he like breaks over the deck list, and then he goes back and he goes, okay, there was actually nothing that cost mana in this except for Electrify. So Higashi top 8ing the Pro Quest kind of put the seed in people's brains of, is this deck real? Is it not? And if you remember, the discourse after that event was, oh, this deck is just hyper aggro. It's very like linear, which I guess it is linear, but it's easily countered by fatigue strategies. It's easy countered by X. You can play Y, you can play Z. And it wasn't until folks ended up going 15-0 and then like 3 other people top 8ing, with the list that it kind of cemented in people's mind going, okay, this is a real entity. This is something we need to either A, test against, come up with a plan, or B, be playing ourselves. And I think had Higashi not top 8'd and it just be like a UK thing and only 1 or 2 people in the UK, those questions would have happened at like a week before the US Nationals, and the deck list wouldn't even have come out until, the Wednesday before. And at which point, people aren't going to give up months of testing and their pet decks to kind of switch decks the night before. But, with a 2-week buffer, I think that was enough comfort zone for a lot of people who have already thought about the deck, play with it a little bit, and kind of make the switch over.
Yeah, UK Nationals is very much the proof of concept, right? To answer the question we were all wondering, which is like, was the deck even, was it good enough in an open field? And the answer was yes, right? Because on the Pro Quest, you can kind of, you can, what we sometimes call gem format, your way up to top 8, right? You can just get favorable matchups. But if you look at something like UK Nationals, it's going to be quite harder, quite a bit harder.
Yeah, for sure. You can win with anything, stuff like Earth Briar and.
I was wondering.
Hey, you might even bring it to Nationals. It's even worse. So that's hilarious because Earth Briar was actually dumpstering everything in the format as well. But somebody created a deck and played that. Yeah, I got to play that matchup and figured, well, this isn't a very good matchup for Earth Briar. So I was on Lightning Briar the night before, like 100% switched. Like, there's no way I'm going back. And then I just had my friend Zach convince me, and unfortunately, he convinced me of the wrong thing. But so I ended up playing the calling because Nationals didn't go well, and I went up to Tariq and I was like, "Hey man, it's not going well for me. I don't know if you have any teammates that are in like the calling, but if you want to shoot me the list, like I'll play it tomorrow because obviously it's doing really well." He was kind enough to give it to us, and because obviously when we get to the calling or even Nationals at Orlando, there's a big question you got to answer, which is how do you win the mirror, right? Because you're going to be playing mostly mirrors, at least a fourth statistically. There's a little card in there that I didn't believe in at first, but it's a good card. It's called Yellow Ravenous Rabble.
Yeah. No, that's sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, that's it. That's pretty much it. I mean, the one thing I want to kind of recall here is the quote that you said to me was that the first person that stumbles loses. I think it's very accurate.
Yeah. And that's kind of what we found in the mirror match of testing is that the edges and the margins were so small that the biggest edge we can do is kind of just guarantee we don't draw 4 non-attack action hands or 4 attack actions or not enough go agains. So really, since UK Nationals or I guess a little bit before UK Nationals up till US was like us just doing iterations and iterations on how do we make this thing the most sound humming machine we can make. Like, how do we make it so we never stumble in the mirror match? How do we make it so once we have a tempo, we just never give it up?
Yeah. I think before I toss over to you, Hayden, I want to mention just for anybody who wasn't like participating in this kind of like great game that we were all playing, we were trying to break the mirror. There's a lot of mirror tech out there, right? There's like a team on Flash Freeze. People on significantly different versions of the deck, like Tyler Horspool. His deck very different, right? Had Rites of Lightning, like all these 1 costs. It was crazy, much different from the core ethos of the deck. Like our mirror tech initially was to run things like Force of Nature, and obviously Pulse of Candlehold, which made it into the original list anyway. In terms to like kind of value block, but also Force of Nature functions as an additional draw trigger on anything that has a buffed attack. So this was like a funny game that all of the Lightning Briar players are trying to play the day before Nationals, but even more so the day before the calling, right? Because because after the calling started the day after Nationals, we all could see Tariq's list was on stream. You could go watch it and you could kind of snag it, right? So it's a funny little mind game.
Yeah, and I think that's where most of my edge actually came from. Was I had basically a month of testing to kind of work out the little things. So I'd gone through iterations with Force of Nature. I'd gone through iterations with Rites of Lightning and stuff like that. And I think that was the only the edge left that I had was, having played with the deck a little bit longer than most people and coming to conclusions that I did.
Yeah, you've done all those things, and it's I think it's really important to say because you refined this deck so much, Tariq, and you played it a lot, and as you say, you had more time with it than other players. That's one thing, but the mirror and the edges that you came up with, it's still a skill match. Like it's not just you run it in and whoever draws better wins, right? There's still like lines of play in there. There's still turns you're lining up with your embodiments where you're trying to force I guess in terms like trying to swing some tempo, and some terms where you're trying to like back end the embodiment turns. And having played picking up your list on that Saturday for the calling and playing a lot of mirrors, I was actually surprised just how I guess there's actually a lot of edges that you can gain the more you know about the deck, or the more you've played with it, or maybe the more aware you are of certain, I guess, interactions or things that you can do. So I thought it was also really surprising as well that it's not just like this list is super aggressive and it's draw dependent as much as you tuned it and tweaked it. There's also a lot of play to it as well, which was it was really cool to see.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's little micro decisions here and there. The gentleman that came 8th place, I forget his name now, but he recently did a deck tech on it himself, and he was saying a lot of really good points. So if anybody wants any kind of tips and pointers, I agree with in a large part of the stuff he said. His deck list was a little bit significantly, well, not a little bit, it was significantly different than mine. They were playing the Rites of Lightning and so forth. But the core idea of, knowing when to block, knowing when to give one card up to prevent, potential 8 damage is a big part of it, right? Because if you block a card that has a draw effect on it, like a Snatch as the last card, not only are you preventing the 4 damage that the snap represents, but you're preventing a subsequent card from going in an arsenal, which is an additional 4 damage. So you're functionally blocking for 8. And just little things like that. The play draw decision was an interesting back and forth. All my opponents. I took the draw. Yeah, for sure. So I'm of the strongest belief that you should be on the draw in the mirror. And I had opponents that kind of looked at me strange and basically just flat out told me I'm wrong. And I'm like, all right, just please make your first play. I don't need to know why. But yeah, so it was a back and forth all weekend. A lot of opponents swore by going first. A lot of people like myself swore by going second. All I can do is kind of provide my rationale and let you as the viewer decide. So, and then Brendan, maybe you can give me your thoughts after, because I'm not actually sure what you guys were choosing in the calling, or whether to go first or second. But for me, and I will say it goes back to, there was a gentleman that kind of was on the deck for UK Nationals, and he did a deck tech on it. And I think he recounts a game where he took the draw against eventual winner Matt Folks. And he talks about how had he only been on the play, he would have won. And he recounts he had a hand of Lightning Press and Ball Lightning and 2 cards. And Folks came in with just his whole hand and dealt 10 damage to him turn 1. And he functionally lost the game. And I just want to say that I acknowledge that is a possibility. You can just draw hands that don't block well, and your opponent just comes in off the bat for a ton of damage. But more than likely, what ends up happening is your opponent wants to end their first turn with an arsenal. So they're playing with 3 cards, and they can really kind of put 9 to 12 damage at you. And if you have a relatively decent hand, you're probably only leaking 2 to 3 damage on average. And what that means is that you, as the player going second, you get to reciprocate with 12 damage plus an arsenal card yourself. And your opponent either has to take the damage, in which case you're up a turn cycle, right? Because 12, 12, 12, 12, all the way to 0, you're going to win that race. Or they have to be the first one to block, and then they're down cards for their subsequent turn cycle. So I think the advantage that you get for going second and being the first one to draw real blood is much more valuable than leaking 2 to 3 arcane damage with certain draws. but I'll pass it to you.
100%. So I think that you're right. So there's definitely an aspect to getting in the first damage. You also get the first. You don't get the first embodiments. Like usually the first kind of effective embodiments 1 to 2. Usually 2+. That's really where you want to be key. So the reason why I like being on the play is I see the deck as sort of a plunder run deck. In the sense, and the chance to have a plunder run arsenal on turn 1, quite good. But also it's pretty consistent that you're able to get 1 embodiment, right? The damage is slightly irrelevant. I think when if you do kind of, I think it's always incorrect to blast your 4-card hand. But if let's say you blast your 3-card hand, you do end up getting like 5 damage on them or something. That's not so good. The 2 embodiments can be quite good as well. And then if you're able to arsenal that plunder run, I think that's really kind of what takes it to the next level, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing is like, it's interesting because it's like, even the question is like, I think where it gets confusing and kind of, the real intricacy comes in is like, when is a card actually like, when do you actually commit a non-attack action to block? Because sometimes, you'll have 2, 3 embodiments, but still blocking that attack for 4 or is just not effective, right? Denying that embodiment, anything like that. So because sometimes the attack actually just wants to keep, its 5-card hand, right? Because those are your explosive hands. Maybe you've drawn the Sting or something like this. But the reason why I like to go first is to try to get the first embodiment. If I can get 2, it's amazing. Obviously, there's a downside if you don't get any. I think it's actually worse to go first. But I also want to be the first player to play a 5-card hand, right? Especially when my deck has 9 plunder runs. I found it to be quite effective. Hayden, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm in between the both of you. I think in the weekend just been, I was perfectly happy to go second because I think my opponents didn't realize just how ineffectively the deck can defend without any embodiments. Obviously, you've got 0 blocks, you've got 2 blocks, and so I was pretty happy that my opponents probably wouldn't just like throw gas at me. They'd probably just like create a rune chant, maybe create an embodiment of lightning, arsenal pass, depending on what their hand looked like. Maybe they'd play like Arcanic Shockwave and get in like for 1 embodiment or something. But that's actually similar to how I felt as well. Like I think moving forward with players knowing the deck list a bit more and it being a bit more open, I actually think I do want to be going first personally for a lot of the reasons Brendan's just said. But also I think the thing that you mentioned, Tariq, I think people are a lot more aware of how poorly the deck defends, especially on like turn 0, which is kind of my consideration. But I mean, the other thing as well is like the deck list is going to change. I'm sure like people are going to iterate on this now that it's open, right? Like they don't have the same, whether it's you who does it or whether it's someone else, because they don't have the information that you have around like testing Force of Nature or things like that. Like the deck list will still continue to change. So I think for me across the weekend, I chose to play in the mirror whenever I won the dice roll. Yeah, that's kind of how I saw it.
Yeah, I'm not extremely confident because it's weird because there's a very solid, I feel like there's really solid arguments for both sides, right? And it's just like you just got to figure out where the delta is on like like when it ends up terribly, right? Because if you do go first and like if you don't create an embodiment and you don't arsenal something that's relevant, it really sucks. Like if you do the double non-attack and play embodiment of lightning, that's okay, right? You have a 5-card hand coming up with an embodiment of lightning, but I really think you need the plunder run to push that over. So I think both have their merits. I mean, what I really like about the mirror is that for me, it usually didn't matter, right? Because the mirror actually felt quite scale based, right? So I know it's funny. I want to pull attention to something that Tariq said because it's hilarious. Because you hear him say, "I wasn't planning on playing this deck because I missed the Road to National season." That should put it in perspective with how where Tariq is when joining this game and how much he's achieved and how quickly he has. He says, "I missed the Road to National season." That's unbelievable. Because like I would pull back and I'd say like, yeah, it's not like chain mirrors where it is skill based until someone does some kind of bullshit where it's like an Art of War or something like that. Where this is like this feels like a chain mirror with all the BS that's cut out, right? It's all micro decisions, it's all sequencing. It's all about tempo, like you said.
Yeah, so just to clarify for a second, Hayden, you're a proponent of going first. Brendan, you're kind of on the fence, but you're leaning towards more going first. And I'm on the draw.
Yep, I probably lean towards going first as well.
All right, then I'm gonna make a comment or ask a question, I guess, because you said something that I kind of agree with. You said the deck largely revolves around your power turns revolve around plunder run. True.
Mm-hmm.
So would that not make more sense than wanting to go second? If, for example, the player that goes second usually sees 7 to 8 cards because you get to cycle your hand. And the player going first really only sees 4 cards. So there's a higher chance, at least in my mind, that if I go second, I'm more likely to start with an Arsenal plunder run than if you go first. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, so the question is if your opponent allows you to filter your hand, right? Because I only think you let you attack into your opponent if you're able to get an effective amount of embodiments, right? So if you're able to get the one embodiment of Earth, then maybe that there's a question to do that. But you're also putting them at 39 and turning on the scars. Sometimes the most effective thing can be to arsenal the plunder and create the embodiment of lightning and pass. Therefore, you're seeing more cards being the first player to play 5-card stands, and your opponent has no option to filter. So I think that may be the most ideal, because there is like a very knee jerk reaction to be like, okay, I have arcanic shockwave and a fuse card. I'm going to play that, get an embodiment, and then but you're putting a deck to 39 that plays 3 Scar for Scars and all this kind of silliness. I think that there's a lot of danger there, right? And you also turn on their skull cap.
Fair enough. So yeah, I think good points all around, and you, the viewer, can decide going into. I know the Canadian Nats is this weekend, and there are a couple other nationals, and you at home can decide whether you want to do what I suggest or be wrong. So
I was going to say,
I would say one of us is a national champion.
Yeah, exactly.
One
of us is.
And just if I could pivot for a second, because this leads to a really good discussion, and I wanted to talk about the card Force of Nature a little bit more, if you guys don't mind.
Go for it.
Just humoring me. But, there's a lot of good talk this weekend. I knew Jacob Baugh, his deck largely revolved around Force of Nature. And I know Jacob back from the Magic days, and I know he's just an amazing card player in of itself. Like, he's always impressed me on the SCG tour. He impressed me all weekend. And he was a very high proponent of it. And in my head and in my testing, I'm not going to give an opinion. I'm just going to kind of state what I found to be true, and then you guys can kind of weigh in. But Force of Nature, his point was, it's kind of like always like a plunder run. You plan to play it out the start of your chain, you kind of represent multiple attacks, and you get to draw off each separate instance of an attack dealing damage, which is why it's good. But my experience has been, let's say best case scenario, you don't block it all in the mirror or any matchup, and you start with a 5-card hand, right? Force of Nature and Arsenal, 2 attack actions, and then 2 pump spells, right? Because in order to get the buff off of, or the effect of Force of Nature, because you're not fusing it with our deck, you functionally need a buff. So if you play Force of Nature, then you play a pump spell, and then you play an attack. Okay. The first hit that happens, the card functionally just cycles itself. You're giving up Force of Nature to draw a card. So you're not netting anything. Okay. And then you come in with your second attack. If I block it, or in this case, I block the first one and then let the second one through, and you don't draw exactly another attack action, or even if you do, you're not getting any additional value because you're out of cards, right? If you go Force of Nature, pump spell, attack, I block the first one, you then follow up with pump spell, attack with the second one, no matter what you draw, you can't get an additional third value off of your Force of Nature. It literally needs to be either a plunder run buffed Force of Nature or a snatch buff to really draw 2 cards, and then even then you need another pump spell plus attack to keep going. Which is why a lot of the time Plunder Run in the mirror match is the first card I block with in the late game, because in order to get value off it, you need to arsenal it. Otherwise, it kind of just cycles itself, best case scenario. So for me, playing out a naked Force of Nature a lot of the times is not kind of what I wanted to be doing in the mirror. And a lot of the times it was just kind of just cycling itself. So, and it was upping my blue count too.
Yeah.
If you guys want to comment.
I'd add one to that. There's one, I completely agree. And that's like a thought process that I thought through as well. There's one sort of addition to that is that if you play a Plunderer from Arsenal plus the Force of Nature, you get that additional buff plus the ability to cycle a card like you talked about with like a Lightning Press on a Snatch, for instance. So there's one kind of caveat to that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, completely agree. I think the side to it with like the Force of Nature as well is like what's the other reason you're playing that card? So if you're playing that as like for the idea of plunder runs, 10 through 12, I think that probably never makes your deck. I think it's got to have reason to be in there, whether it be the fact that it's a non-attack action that defends 3, so it has the ability to defend 4 in a mirror match where 4 is the most important, crucial number in that game of one embodiment. Or if the fact that if you are worried about these ice decks, these channel like frigid decks, and you are trying to get your blue count to maybe 12, then this is I guess an option to play this card. But I think like it wasn't for us specifically. I don't think it was like an auto include. I think it was like a card that we were trying out, in conjunction with the Pulse. Yeah,
sure. So, probably the main reason we cut it from the deck is like it pulled away from the core competency of the deck a little bit too much. But the idea is like if we talk about defensive breakpoint, so I think that there was like a dual functionality with like it almost leaning the more important value of this card was actually to block, right? So we have one embodiment, we block from forest, blanking, most of the unpumped cards in the deck, and denying embodiments, especially things like snatch at the end of the chain. If we have 2 embodiments, it blocks for 5, right? But then 5 plus a piece of armor, or plus a other, let's say an attack action that blocks for 2, like a rabble or something. Now you're blanking like red plunder runs, right? You're blanking the red plunder run plus the attack action that's coming in for 7. So that's like mainly we're trying to see how can we get the most value out of a card that, when we're trying to value block our opponent, but then also might have this sort of dual purpose where it can be useful, right? Especially off a lightning press, or like Hayden said, off the plunder run or something like that. But ultimately we were looking for value out of blocking. So that was kind of the way we were taking it, while the way you guys were taking it, or the way yourself was taking it, was just you added in the yellow rabbles, right? Which is the total opposite direction.
Yeah. No, and those are some really good points. And I think going forward, especially like Hayden mentioned, we're going to see an increase in ice decks. If I want those blue spells, blue pitch cost cards, 9 through 12, 12 through 15, Force of Nature, I think, is going to be one of the first cards I go to. So, I definitely think I'm undervaluing the defensive value, probably just because I was playing a little bit more Rabbles. But I think, you guys are definitely correct. And I'm going to be looking at it a little bit closer going
Definitely forward. Sucks off a Rabble.
yeah, especially a yellow Rabble.
Oh yeah. Those blues. Yeah, those blues are rough off the yellow rabbles for sure. Yeah, I'm think I'm gonna make a career out of hitting Sting of Sorcery off the top every time I play Rabble. Just fucking right in the nuts. I'm just like, oh, come on.
Yeah, but so good.
Yeah, so I mean that was a way better conversation. Like that was incredible. That's exactly the kind of conversation I want to have about the deck, because that's really the thing that breaks the mirror, right? Is when you can figure out those questions, or at least explore them. Is how you get your edge, and how you ultimately are able. Because if you bring this deck into an event, you've got to be able to flip the mirror in your favor, because it's going to be most of your matches. But Tariq, I want to ask you as well: what kind of archetypes do you generally gravitate towards? Is it something like Lightning Briar? When I say gravitate towards, maybe in your Magic background or something like that. Is there a certain style of play or deck that you would prefer to be on?
I would honestly just play 60 islands if it meant I win. I would
yes. Okay. Yeah.
So like in our group, there's like a running joke that I'm like Boggles guy. And like I have registered Boggles for Boggles, for people that don't know, is a deck that you kind of just put a bunch of equipment on a creature that cannot be killed, and you just attack it like multiple. It's like one of the least interactive, least fun decks you could ever play in the game. And I played it for exactly one event ever because I thought it was correct. And it ended up being, I think, the best player in the world at the time was at the same event and ended up top 8ing with the deck. And, the top 16 was like largely dominated by it. But it just, I'm willing to, I have a pretty wide range, and I'll just play any deck that I think will give me the best shot at winning.
Yeah. For sure. So just a true spike at heart, huh?
Yeah, I guess so.
Willing to play the best deck. Yeah, definitely empathize with that. Hayden, did you have something?
I just actually want to pull it back quickly, because I think something that you've just talked about through that whole conversation we just had about Force of Nature and I guess effectively theory behind deck building is one of the most important things that you can do in this game. And I think if people are asking about like, what does someone like Tariq Patel do to go ahead and win, US Nationals, or come off the back of the calling top 8, it's things like that, right? Like it's these sort of thought processes that you go through to understand like, why is a card in my deck, or why am I playing these cards? Like how am I trying to sequence games? And it goes all the way through like your deck building, all the way through from like the conversation we just had, all the way through your deck building, all the way through into the way you actually sequence and play your games and your turns. And those are the kinds of, I guess, like experience that you've obviously bought or ported over from a game like Magic the Gathering, and many people also doing from other TCGs that enable you to, I guess, go and have success in this format. Like it's not just the right Tariq at the right time. It's also Tariq with the right thought process at the right time, I think, as well. And I just wanted to hit on that and make that really clear that those sort of thought processes are just so key to having success in this game.
Definitely agree with that. And if you don't mind, I can tell a little funny story about my deck too.
Please.
Because I am so OCD about like ratios, and like I don't want more than 6 blues at any time in my deck. That the night before the event, I kid you not, like I'm going through it, and I needed an 80th card, and I could not think of like a single. I went through every card in existence that I could possibly play in the deck, and I could not find a card that would not mess up my ratios, because I had a plan for every deck that I expected to see. Every card coming in and out, and all my blues, all my reds, all my yellows, I worked them out perfectly and I that 80th card, I could not figure it out. So right before I went to bed, I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. Like, I'm just gonna play Crack Bauble in a deck. And all my friends, ha ha ha, like very funny. I'm like, no, I'm dead serious. Like, I'm just gonna register Crack Bauble. And they're like, what? Are you serious? I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do it for the story. I'm just gonna tell everybody Crack Bauble for a crack deck, make it my 80th card, and run with it. And so I went there the morning of, and I went to the head judge just to make sure it was fine. I'm like, I'm gonna register Crack Bauble, and he's like, one moment. He like looks it up on his phone. He comes back to me. He's like, Crack Bauble is a token. You are not allowed to put it in your deck. I'm like, oh, God damn it. So that's where the Coax and Commotion came from in my deck. So for anybody wondering, that should have been a Crack Bauble.
Did you at least put a Crack Bauble in the deck box for like posterity?
I didn't think about it. I don't know why, because it has like a back. It doesn't register in my brain that it's a functional token, even though I was told it. So I didn't want to like run the gambit of getting like deck checked and then somebody being like, what is this in your deck?
Fair.
Yeah.
Question about Coax and Commotion. Would you play that card against a deck like Bravo or a deck like Oldheim? Do you think that the quicken token effect is symmetrical, or do you think it's just going to be net positive for the Briar player?
I do think it's likely going to be net positive for the Briar, especially if it is exactly the last attack that you play. But with that being said, so yes, to answer your question, if I needed an extra card versus Bravo or Oldhim, I would play it. But I'm also a big proponent of not adding additional cards to your decks. So anytime I take out cards or bring in cards, I like to take out cards to keep the ratios the same. I don't think, pushing the game an extra 2 to 3 turns favors you. If anything, I think you're kind of, allowing yourself to be attacked a couple more times by Hammer, and it allows you to set up an end game. It's harder to set up the bottom of your deck when you have more cards and it takes longer to get there, because then you're more forced to interact with their attacks if you're at a lower life total, etc. So with that being said, even though I wanted Coax and Commotion in that matchup specifically, there was no card I wanted it more than that was already in my deck, if that makes any sense. So I would not take any of the existing attacks from the deck out to replace Coax. It would simply be, if I was looking for an additional attack, I would put it in the deck, but I don't do that because I don't board up cards.
I just thought of my favorite question, I think, of this entire podcast, and Hayden is going to love it because Tariq and I had a little conversation about this. So Tariq, in the mirror, Garganian Tome or no Garganian Tome?
You have to Garganian Tome only because it's the prisoner's dilemma, right? If you do not play it, and your opponent does, they have an edge. So just like in the prisoner's dilemma, you always choose to steal. I think in the mirror match, it's correct to just always play Garganian Tome.
So does the prisoner's dilemma hold up if you believe that you may have an edge on your opponent already because you're a better player? So not to sound arrogant, right? But assuming that you're the better player, do you want to give them the edge of having the Garganian Tome draw 2, or only let them have the Garganian Tome, but you'll keep the edge in your play skill? Is that a reasonable kind of variable to factor in?
No, and I've never liked those kind of questions, especially when they're phased like that, because they're a bit of a fallacy, right? You are the better player, quote unquote, because you're making the highest expected value decisions time after time. So if you are making a lower expected value decision because of an illusionary skill gap, then I think you're losing an edge, not gaining it. Because overall, you're kind of looking at it, how can I objectively have the most edge? And, if you ask the question to 2 different people and somebody might think, yes, I have a skill edge, I'm going to take that out, they're losing out, right? They're losing the prisoner dilemma game. So I think it's a bit of a fallacy, and I think you should always just make the highest expected value play, regardless of what you think of your opponent or what you think of yourself. I think that's what gives you the edge, if anything.
Yeah, I think the question, like the way that Brennan's coming from this and the way that Tariq's coming from this is like very similar, but in fact, I think it's just the value that you're both placing on the Garganian Tome is like probably the difference by the sounds of it. Like the Garganian Tome for 1 card, Tariq, obviously you think that is like quite large amount of value gained. Obviously there's like the implications of the fact hitting out for Rabble it's not 0%, right? So there's a few I guess pieces to that. Also the other pieces, you take that card out, you're replacing it with a different card in that matchup. So there's like, it's not just like a straight like to Brendan's point, there's variables, right? But I think you can remove a lot of those and just play based on the value of the card that you expect. And I think maybe that's where some of the differences in the conversation is happening.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that's not even my side, right? I'm just trying to play the kind of the devil's advocate because
Okay, all right.
honestly, I don't really know, right? And you see a kind of a dichotomy of beliefs when it's like, do you play the Gorganian combo or do you not? And for me, my plan during the tournament was to not play it in Swiss, but if I ever played it against Hayden or Dante, I was throwing that bad boy in because I didn't think that they would play it against Spade. But then we probably end up both playing I think the same thing.
There you go. There's your dilemma.
Yeah, exactly.
You just play it. Then.
It's. I love that. That's a little mind game, kind of like with your opponent already. Is to Gorganian Tome or to not. Tariq, I think I'm correct here, but is it true that you used your Pro Tour invite from Cincinnati on Nationals?
It is true. That's how I qualified. So yeah, I don't know if that's cocky or just poor value, but I just love playing games, especially when I'm having fun at something. I don't care. Like if I just played in it and I scrubbed out and I lost it, it wouldn't have bothered me. I just wanted to play as many games as possible at the highest level. So I was like, yeah, screw it. I'm going to use my PTI for Nationals, and it ended up working out. So
when did you decide?
I think it's freaking awesome.
When did you decide? Sorry, Tariq. Like, when did you make that call? Because that's like not a small call to make, right? You have your invite for the first ever Pro Tour that's going to happen sometime in the next 6 to 12 months. You're already like locked away for that. There's a chance to play. You could have just played the Calling Orlando, right? You could have just gone and been there and like, okay, I still have a great chance to win this event and to bank a second PTI. But instead, you obviously make the decision to play. So when did you actually make that decision?
Right after Cincy, I was like, Nationals is coming up. It's the highest event possible. I want to play at the biggest stage at the highest level. I'm having a blast. So I emailed them and I'm like, please take me. And they're like, okay, you can use your PTI. I'm like, sweet. So,
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about it a little bit at the top of the show, but it was kind of an awesome story. I met Tariq for the first time in Dallas, where he got the crushing ninth. And I think that we had a quick conversation after I finished up my draft, which was to go or not to go, right? And you said something about like flight prices or something. Like if it's below X, I'm going. I was like, dude, just go. You're gonna get it. Just go. And I think a lot of people gave you that same kind of that same sentiment. So obviously it worked out extremely well, getting that PTI and then taking it to Nationals and becoming the champion.
Yeah, it's wild how like one or two conversations, because I honestly wasn't going to go. If like I looked up the flight and it was like $400 or something stupid, I wasn't going to go. But I think between you and Tannen both being like, just go, and I was like, okay, if it's below X, and I pull it up and it was, and
yeah,
I just like booked it on the spot pretty much. So yeah, crazy how things work out, right?
It's a great everything about it is a fantastic story. Like I said, coming from Magic, really putting your nose to the grindstone, becoming the champion, getting bubbling out at ninth, using that as fuel to go back and get second, get it, and then becoming the champion in the rematch. It's just ridiculous. It's probably the best narrative Flesh and Blood has in its history. But let's talk about the future, right? Since we all have PTIs now. Mm-hmm. Tariq, I want to hear, what are your hopes for 2022, the Pro Tour and Worlds?
I think everybody hopes that they just keep winning. Once LSS kind of announces what next year will look like, I'll have more of a better answer for you. But as of now, the next step is kind of just knocking New Zealand off their kind of pedestal. Speaking of them, they're great people. They're very fun. I think they're a bit smug, maybe rightly so, maybe not, but I'm coming for them next. So I want to play at the highest level, which means playing against New Zealand. I talk some shit, but it's mostly for fun. I love them all, but I do want to kind of beat them at their own games. So I'm really looking forward to the Pro Tour season. I'm really looking forward to World, and I want to beat them pretty bad. So
are you planning on traveling frequently for, let's say we had, I think that some people, like based off kind of the numbers, it looks like maybe 30 callings next year. Are you planning on traveling in the US like you did for, this little sprint? Obviously, we did Dallas, Cincinnati, and Orlando. But, say we have quite a few callings next year. Will you be traveling to a lot of them as well?
Yeah, so if my schedule allows it, unfortunately, my work schedule is quite demanding at times, and it does come first in a lot of respects. So I'll be scheduling around it. The good thing is that my schedule kind of lines up around June, and I'll have a couple months off. But schedule allowing, I will be hopefully grinding the circuit next year. So yeah, you can expect to see me at most, if not all, the callings and Pro Tours.
Yeah, that's super exciting, super cool. I actually just want to add a bit of fuel to the fire, Tariq, to what you spoke about just previously about wanting to knock a certain country off their pedestal. And having played callings in both New Zealand and the US, I think there's going to be some shocks for a few people when the world comes together and it gets to play, the first Pro Tour, the first World Champs, whether it's a calling where people are able to easily travel. I played against some very, very good players on the weekend. There is a number of players, especially in the US, who are really, in the past few months are coming up and are doing a very good job, very just naturally skilled, but also really understand the game and are putting in work as well. So I think by the time we get to that first Pro Tour, we get to callings where people are able to travel a bit easier. I think there's going to be some surprises for a few people. So I just thought I'd add a bit of petrol on the top there.
Well, I hope so. It'll be fun to watch too, And I think that kind of drama and excitement kind of just adds to it too, especially if you're from New Zealand or from America or from Canada or wherever, and you get to see your guy go up against theirs. I think it's a lot of fun to play in, and I hope it's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and I just can't wait for it.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what the Pro Tour is all about, right? Is we start to lean in more to those narratives and start to lean in back into the player backgrounds, the stories, the rivalries, kind of the everything that makes the players that make Flesh and Blood. I think that's going to be really exciting to watch because I'm already starting to get a bit entrenched in it, right? I was watching your final and stuff, and Hayden will tell you we were walking away from the venue, and we were walking to meet up for this patron meetup or something, and I had it on my phone and I was just doing a play-by-play narration of that final because it was just brutal.
Yeah, it could have gone either way. Michael, shout out to Michael, by the way. What an amazing player. Just the way he played that final game was actually just watching an artist paint. Just some of the sequencing and some of the way he played some of his turns was just actually unreal. Even from his opponent's side, I'm like, this is not good for me, but god damn, I tip my hat to you. So he's going to be an amazing player next year as well, and I'm excited to see what he does.
Yeah, it's unbelievable that you two were able to play in Cincinnati and then run back the final. It's just just the things that have to happen for that to be possible are just incredible.
Yeah, I was kind of daggering him all throughout the first day and second day, and as I was winning and he was winning, and then he picked up a loss day one, I think, and I was still winning day one, so I'm like, oh, you better make top 8, you can't lose now. So yeah, it's all in good fun. Michael knows I love him, but yeah, it was an unreal finish and definitely a storybook finish too. I'm just glad I came out on top of this one and not at
Well, you wouldn't. Yeah. It's actually I didn't even realize until the final was happening, and Brendan was like, this is a rematch of the final in Cincinnati, and I didn't even click until that point. There was so many other. I guess there was this just a lot happening in that top 8. That was a stacked top 8, right? And there's a lot of things happening. So yeah, it was probably my favorite story of the weekend, actually, to be honest.
Sweet. All right. Well, Tariq, again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited and I think I've said this to you in person many times, I'm very excited for the future. I'm very excited for 2022. I'm excited to see you on the Pro Tour as well as Hayden. And I think that Legend Story is absolutely going to crush it, and we're going to have an incredible year ahead of us. But again, thank you so much for joining us. For everybody else in the comments, Garganian Tome or no Garganian Tome? Let's say it in. Until then, that's time in the round. Active player. Whatever it is. I'll see you again.
That's time in the round.